Welcome to the Transforming Trauma podcast. Transforming Trauma is presented by the NARM Training Institute. I'm your host, Emily Ruth, and I'm so glad you've joined us today. Hi, Transforming Trauma listeners. Do you want to join the international NARM community in support of trauma-informed care? If so, please consider joining us to become trained in the neuroaffective relational model. We are excited to offer 2 starting levels of professional trainings designed to support those of you working with clients or populations dealing with the effects of adverse childhood experiences and complex trauma. The Level 1 Online NARM Basics training is a psychoeducational training designed for helping professionals in a variety of fields, such as mental health professionals, substance abuse counselors, educators, doctors, nurses, other healthcare providers, coaches, and more. The Level 2 NARM Therapist training is a comprehensive clinical training designed for licensed mental health professionals, as well as current mental health graduate students and clinical interns and trainees. For more information on these NARM trainings and to apply, please visit www.narmtraining.com/schedule. And now for our interview. Isabelle Shook has been an equine therapy practitioner since 1998. She offers a somatic, trauma-informed approach within the wisdom of horses healing trauma. Belle adapts and blends 5,200 continuing education hours as an advanced NARM therapist and somatic experiencing practitioner, among several other modalities. Belle has been a licensed counselor for 15 years and is a board-certified coach. She has worked with her team of American Bashkir curly horses, Mimi, Penny, and Salsa, for over 20 years. Please enjoy this conversation with Isabelle Shook. All right, I am here with Belle Shook. Thank you so much for coming to the podcast.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
If it's okay, I'll start like we would a NARM session, and that is to ask you, what would you like listeners to get out of our interview today?
Yes, great NARM question. I think that I would like the listeners today to learn that horses are amazing trauma healers. Whether we're talking about shock trauma or developmental trauma, they have an innate instinctual nature, desire, and ability to help individual and collective nervous systems come into greater coherence, balance, restoration, and ventral vagal states of safe, calm connection with ourselves and others.
I'm so excited for our conversation today. And I told you this, but your interview is the first time I've interviewed someone that I've actually met in person. We live not too far from each other, just a couple hours. And so you were kind enough to invite me up to your ranch, and I got to be with you in a space and learn a little bit about your beautiful horses. And can I say their names? Is that appropriate?
Yeah.
Can I? I got to work a little bit with Mimi and Penny and Salsa, and the listeners will have heard a little bit about them too in your intro. Why don't we just start with you sharing about the work that you do in the field of complex trauma?
Yeah. So I have been doing equine therapy since 1998, and I founded Equine Guidance in Sedona, Arizona in 2004. And the work that I do with the horses is trauma-informed, but also there's a spiritual aspect to it in that we're really working with the horses as guides to helping clients be able to have a top-down and a bottom-up approach. And that's very congruent and consistent with how NARM works. It's not only a bottom-up, meaning somatically to the mind, but also from the mind down to the body and the nervous system. And the horses and I work collectively to support people in being able to come into greater coherence and to also develop and practice the capacity to hold more balanced and calm states. So I think in the work of trauma, oftentimes therapists, myself included, can think like, if we just get rid of that ick, then everything will be fine. But in all actuality, what we're doing out here at Equine Guidance with the horses is also supporting people in being able to feel safe again in states of connection and calm. And the horses do that with an exceptional grace, because what they want more than anything as prey animals is harmony within themselves and the herd. So whoever comes to work with the horses that day, join the herd, and then the horses work on that person's behalf to help them come into greater balance.
I love that. And, of course, as you're talking, I'm thinking about my experience and I'm thinking, okay, I do hope this conversation can give listeners a little bit of what I experienced there with those horses. And you used the word grace. And that was a word that I did think of when watching them because they're so beautiful in the way that they move. And it is so graceful. So I love that that's how they, do this work of balancing and all these things that you mentioned. How would you define complex trauma? How do you hold that?
Yeah. So complex trauma, I think the way that I would explain complex trauma is that from my perspective and experience, trauma happens in relationship. And traditionally, therapists speak of developmental trauma or complex trauma happening in relationship because it very much forms our identities, our sense of self, our sense of safety to be able to connect with ourselves and others. Though I think that actually all trauma, whether it's developmental or happens when we're 60 and all of a sudden we get in a car accident, happens in relationship, because I have a relationship to the other drivers on the road. I have a relationship to my car. I have a relationship to trusting the other drivers on the road or not, or trusting myself and being able to drive again. So when I think of complex trauma or trauma in general, it's really about healing relationship. And today, more than ever, we have the opportunity collectively and individually to heal the disease of disconnection. And I would say that complex trauma or trauma is really the disease of disconnection. And as a mammal, human beings are mammals, we are biologically wired to be in relationship and have healthy and safe connections that are going to help us form and grow and excel in our lives. I have a theory that Maslow's theory may actually be incorrect. So Maslow talked about that humans need food, shelter, and water for survival. And that's true. However, human beings have survived the most horrific of circumstances through generations without food, shelter, and water, and have survived because they have belonging and connection. So I would describe complex trauma as the disease of disconnection.
I like this idea of Maslow's, like maybe it's incomplete. You're saying we need to add connection to that piece of food, shelter, water, and connection, because we can't really, as humans, survive, much less thrive without that.
So he actually has belonging in there, but it's at the top.
Yeah.
But I think it should be at the bottom.
It should be to the bottom.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a perfect place to start. So what led you to work with complex trauma? And then if you would speak a little bit about, specifically to the kind of work that you're doing, the complex trauma and these beautiful horses.
So I think what led me to complex trauma and really learning about it is that the longer I was doing this work with horses and people, I decided that I wanted to get and earn a master's degree in counseling, because experiential learning, which is what I have my undergraduate degree in, to me felt like it could really easily lend itself into deeper work. And I very much enjoy learning. So it was a natural decision for me to go back to school and earn that master's degree. And then the longer I was a therapist, the more I became aware that whatever the diagnosis or interpersonal challenge or self-doubt was going on for a person, there always appeared to be some type of root in stress or trauma. And I then completed Peter Levine's training in somatic experiencing and became a somatic experiencing practitioner, and did some of Peter's advanced work too, which was a very rewarding 5-year road. And then naturally through that process, I learned of Larry Heller and Brad, and was really excited about being able to deepen my awareness and understanding of developmental trauma specifically through the lens of SE, and then as it evolved through what Larry created in NARM.
Okay, so it's been quite a journey. And you started, I know you've been working with the horses for 20 years. Is that about how long you would say your career has been so far?
We could probably add a couple more years there in the
Yeah.
beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think also what really interested me about deepening my understanding of complex trauma is that I've always really loved people and been very interested in people's lives and the experiences that they've had and the stories that they had to share. Even as a child, I very much enjoyed spending time with my grandparent generation and parent generation and listening to their different stories and things that they wanted to share. And then even at the end of the day, when I go to watch television after doing therapy all day, I'm like, oh, what autobiography can I watch? And oh, what true story is out there that I can watch for the next 2 hours before I go to bed?
So you enjoy getting to know people, which makes you a great fit for this work.
Yeah. And then I think
Yeah.
also I have a strong desire to help people in experiencing greater levels of joy and harmony and peace and balance. And to think that the purpose of life is joy. And working with the horses is such a great way to be able to help people reconnect back to themselves and others so that then they can reach the ventral vagal state of safety and connection and calm and inspiration and thriving in their lives.
Can you share with us how you use NARM in the work that you're doing, especially because I know there's different ways that you work, but when you're working with the horses, how do you weave that in?
That's such a great question. And what I love about equine guidance and NARM is that they're such a natural fit together because in NARM, it's a bottom up and top down approach meeting. So the horses don't have a top down approach because they're horses. And they predominantly engage and interact with each other and us through a right brain to right brain communication. So we're really attentive to the felt sense and what's happening within the space and within the field. So the horses are geniuses at the somatic experiencing work from the bottom up because that's actually already their natural language. So horses don't speak English or French or Chinese or Spanish. They speak the language of the felt sense that is shared within the collective space. So I think it's common for anyone to have walked into a room and they can feel the tension, but they don't know it's there. And then eventually someone talks about what's happening and it's like, okay, that's what's going on. And everyone's nervous system kind of relaxes. And I then can really bring in the top down piece because I do speak English and I do have a logical brain and I do have that, how our thoughts impact how we feel. And so it becomes this really beautiful blend of the horses kind of being masters at the bottom up approach and then me supporting and continuing to help the integration and insights and awarenesses from the top down. And then, this actually also is really a valuable modality when we're talking about developmental trauma, because developmental trauma does get caught in the nervous system or the body. And so talk therapy can be pretty ineffective because oftentimes these traumas have happened to us prior to the development of language, prior to the development of our prefrontal cortex. So coming at healing developmental trauma from just a talk therapy approach can be really challenging or maybe even not effective at times. So the horses then are really spectacular because there's this right brain to right brain communication that's happening between the client and the horse that's allowing the integration and restoration that is happening in the felt sense. So another way to think of it is our first language is like our caregiver holding us, and the gaze between the child and the parent or the caregiver. And it's us as infants feeling the heartbeats. It's us as infants feeling the healthy touch of those around us. And that's really the space that the horses are working in that felt sense.
When you say that they communicate right brain to right brain, can you say a little bit more about that? What does that actually mean that they're communicating right brain to right brain?
Yeah. So because horses don't really have a prefrontal cortex, or they don't really have language in the way that humans do, their communication is sent through space and time. So, for example, if I was to hold two tuning forks and I banged one tuning fork, it would naturally send sound waves through space, and then it would make the second tuning fork go off. And so that felt sense of communication happening within space and the two nervous systems communicating back and forth, and with the intention of coming into greater coherence and into the ventral vagal system, is really how they do it. Because horses spend the majority of their time in that ventral vagal space of safe, connected, calm, and they spend very little time in fight or flight. Though because they're preyed upon in nature, they have to be very attuned to others and what their intentions are and what emotional energies they have within their system, because otherwise they would spend and they would waste a significant amount of energy on flighting. And this then is how they become really amazing healers for the people that join the herd that day, because what horses want more than anything is clear, coherent, calm, safe connection between themselves and the collective.
I just have to like share what my experience of that was, if that's okay.
Yeah, please do.
It was like walking into that space and again, seeing them move so gracefully. And I loved that two of them, at least while I was there, would like just lay on the ground and like get so relaxed and then kind of like scratch their backs in the dirt. And like what you're describing was just so evident. It was so clear that they were completely relaxed and in that, in that state. And when you were just talking, I was just thinking about how you said a majority of their time is spent there, and how opposite, how flip that is for most of us humans, that we spend so much time in a stressed state. And then hopefully we're all doing our work that we spend less time there. But I think in general, humans do spend so much time in a stressed state. And so walking into that space, it was like, even just watching them, my shoulders dropped. I could just kind of sink into this feeling of like, oh, this is clearly they're relaxed. So there's no danger around. They feel it. If there was danger, they would feel it and I would see it in them. I think that's kind of what my body was responding. So anyway, that was just my my first thought when I walked in, just noticing how relaxed they were and how that right brain to right brain communication that you're talking about, that it wasn't even something I had to really think about, actually. It was more of just that feeling of, oh, this is a place I can be relaxed. It was so beautiful.
Yeah. I often describe the work as moving into horse time, because at Equine Guidance, it's really about being with horses. It is not about doing with horses. And that is a significant paradigm shift for how human beings have always related to horses. We've always related to them in a way where they have provided needs for us. So they've plowed our fields for us and helped us grow food. They've been our transportation. They've allowed us to travel into new territories. They've been our status. They've helped us win wars. And all of that has been in the context of like making the horse do something or asking the horse to do something. And it's an action. There's a sympathetic charge to that.
Yeah.
And at the work of Equine Guidance, it's about being. And in that state of being, instead of doing, worlds of information become available to us. And something that I learned in the Eye of the Needle training I took with Peter, which is a near-death experience training, is that in order for that integration and trauma completion to happen successfully, there needs to be no sympathetic charge. And then when I was in my NARM training, and Brad said the same thing as it relates to developmental trauma, that there needs to be no sympathetic charge so that the integration can happen. I was so grateful that in all of the years I've been doing this work, I intentionally have never moved faster than a person's nervous system or horse's nervous system can manage at the time. So if someone were to watch a session, it would be about as exciting as watching paint dry, because it's a very different paradigm shift to how we've always worked with horses. And I think that's one of the things that makes equine guidance pretty unique to other equine therapy approaches, is that it's not about running horses through obstacle courses or horsemanship or learning how to ride or doing anything with the horse. Or there's another approach out there also where they kind of externalize onto the horse, almost like, so if there's 5 horses out in the field, a client may be like, oh, that horse to the left is like my mom because, she's standing there with my 2 siblings. And then, my dad is over here, looking over the fence in another direction. And so it's about gaining a narrative through externalizing a client's experience. Whereas at Equine Guidance, it's very much supporting the client in becoming aware and attentive to the internal process. And the horses are guiding the external process to allow nervous system coherence and co-regulation and organization to happen between those 2 nervous systems. So the nervous system of the horse and the client working collectively to come into greater and greater states of the ventral vagal system and moving out of fight, flight, and freeze.
It's such an exquisite experience and process to be in. And I mean, how amazing that you get to do that like every day. Not to go into too much detail, but I'm thinking about the process of choosing the horse, how the client chooses the horse that they work with. Because in the very beginning, you gave me space and time to be with all of them, and that was really sweet and special. But then also there was this process of choosing the horse, and I wondered if you would talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So horses also have their own experiences in life, and they then hold different resonances, so to speak, of those experiences. And it's very fascinating. So, for example, each horse has a theme that they hold, but they do work outside of those themes too. And it's often the case where whatever healing the horse has done in regards to a specific issue, that person will be drawn to that horse. So an example of that, it's kind of like, the law of attraction, right? Which has some holes in it, but for the sake of
But there's a resonance there, right? Like,
yeah.
yeah.
So for example, it's very common for people that are ready and willing, and their nervous system is ready and willing to work on parent-child relationship dynamics. And part of Mimi's life story is that she has had foals, and human beings are evolving, though we're still pretty insensitive in regards to how we treat other species. So a foal is born and she'll stay with the mom for a certain amount of time, and then the foal gets sold, and that's a real heartbreak. So it's common then for Mimi to help either the child or the parent, wherever the wounding happened in that type of relationship. So for example, a client was working with Mimi, and she just wanted to come and see what I was doing. She had no desire to even have anything specific come up. She was just like, oh wow, this is kind of cool. I want to see what you're doing out here. Mm-hmm. And a few years earlier, she had tragically lost her 22-year-old son in a car accident. And Mimi was the horse that she works with naturally. And Mimi was so nurturing and supportive and kind and infusing her nervous system space with calm and connected and safe as she grieved the next layer of the loss of her only child. And if you were to watch a session, you'd say, oh, well, that's just a person and a horse standing together. So it's really about bringing the attention and the awareness to the emotions that are coming up, the sensations that are there, and then the client's experiences and stories, and then how the horse supports that person in being able to digest that heartache and come into greater peace with themselves. So Mimi stood with that client for about half an hour and pressed on different parts of her body at different degrees with her nose, kind of doing like SE touch work and really supporting that area of her nervous system into integration. And then oftentimes people will feel drawn to working with Penny when they are highly intuitive and sensitive and have experienced that gift as a wounding. And, like there's something wrong with me. I'm so sensitive. And people always tell me I'm so sensitive and I hate being so sensitive, right? All this. And Penny is the leader of the herd because she is so sensitive. So horses can feel and sense. The research says 6 feet, but I personally think it's further than that. And I've witnessed Penny be able to feel much further than that. So one of the horses on the farm was out on a ride, and Penny, Mimi, and Salsa were on the property, and we're all kind of milling around together and enjoying the day. And Penny all of a sudden stopped and she stared in this direction for 10 minutes in a very alert and cautious way with her ears pointed forward. She's very still. She's hardly breathing. And keep in mind, this property that I was on at the time had all these trees, and then there was houses, and then there was Sedona Red Rock Band. So it wasn't classic Arizona open space. There was a lot of, you can't see kind of thing. And then 10 minutes later, this horse who was living on the property at the time arrived, and Penny lowered her head and licked and chewed and went about her way. And the other two horses, Salsa and Mimi, were like, oh, wow, look, here's Cookie. She's back. And so Penny is the leader of the herd, not because she's flashy or dominant or any of these other things that we've been duped into believing is leadership. She's the leader because she's the most sensitive. And as a prey animal, that is a very valuable skill for keeping the collective safe. And then Salsa, he has the lowest tolerance for human incongruence. And when we first got Salsa, we sent him to a trainer, and they said, you better sell this horse. He's not safe. Definitely don't trail ride him. He's like impulsive. He's really, really hard to train. He just, he just doesn't seem to get this. And so we brought him back to the farm, and we thought, well, we don't want to get rid of Salsa. He's a great horse. And what was actually happening is that he was trying to train the trainer. He was trying to show the person who was training him that there were gaps within themselves, and that he was trying to point out to them and help them into healing that space. And interestingly enough, I've heard of a statistic out there that about 10% of the wild horses are considered untrainable. And it's not, in my opinion, that they're untrainable. It's that they have such a desire, such a heart's desire to help those people heal. But then, the horse trainer sees that as defiance or bad behavior or not a good horse in some way. Mm-hmm. An example of that is after my son was born, I had not ridden Salsa in months, obviously, because I was pregnant. And I thought, oh man, like I should really go ride my horse. Like he was exercised and the round pen and so forth, but he was a younger horse. And so I was really wanting to go out and connect with him. But then I was feeling really conflicted because I had this newborn at home. So I rush out to the barn and I tack Salsa up and I bring him to the mounting block and I'm about to put my foot in the stirrup and then he swings his butt out around. So I can't get on. And I'm
Yeah.
okay, no problem. So I get off and I walk him back around and same thing happens. I try to put my foot in the stirrup and he swings his butt out and around. And instead of saying, oh, this horse has got bad behavior, I decided to breathe into my body and to get really present with myself. And then I acknowledged this anxiety that I was having about wanting to be in two places at once, wanting to connect with my horse, but then also wanting to be at home with my newborn. And as soon as I acknowledged that, Salsa lowered his head and licked and chewed. And we spent half an hour walking together around that arena. And we both accomplished what we both wanted, which was a safe, calm, and connected, loving experience with one another.
Wow. All of those experiences that what you shared just gets me in my heart. I just was thinking about, well, what you shared about Mimi. And yeah, it's a personal experience because that truly was my experience, is
Mm.
that my material matched with my horse so beautifully and so well. And I felt so held. And it was what, 3 hours and 45 minutes that I was standing, just pretty much just standing the entire time, but it was so somatic. I was feeling so much in my body. So that was really beautiful. And then what you named around Penny and the sensitivity, that strength is what makes Penny the leader. And what you shared about, how we often hold leadership is about, I don't even know, like how in our society, like what do we say makes a good leader? I don't know. But in the horse arena, what makes a good leader is the one that's most sensitive
Yeah,
because it's a protection, right?
exactly.
Yeah.
And we've all been tricked. So states of fight, flight, and freeze are supposed to be temporary. And they certainly have a place, right? But what's supposed to be our norm is safe, calm, and connected feeling and relationship. So, back to developmental trauma and complex trauma, if someone was raised in an environment where fight, flight, and freeze was the family's nervous system state based on how the parents parented or how the environment or the system of where that person is growing up, if it's anchored in fight, flight, and freeze, that really impacts our ability to be able to experience safe connection with ourselves and others. So, Darwin's theory was made famous by Henry Huxley, and he was nicknamed Darwin's bulldog. And he only made half of Darwin's theory famous, which is survival of the fittest.
Hmm.
And that could not be more wrong. This idea that we need to be dominant over our children or nature or one another is completely backwards. And it is very much reflected in so much of the conflict and struggle in the world and that people experience within themselves and others. And it truly is the disease of disconnection. When you go back and read Darwin's work, in his book, Survival of the Fittest is mentioned approximately 10 times. But then what's mentioned about 120 times is collaboration, democracy, love, working together, systems and coherence. And so that is actually our natural state. Our natural state is to be in connection in a safe and healthy way. Trauma bonding is connection in fight, flight, and freeze.
Mm. Hmm. Wow. You mentioned the one story of the mother. Do you have any other stories that you can share with us?
I do have another story that I can share with you. A client came to work with me and she said that she has done every therapy modality that she can imagine, trying to shift this feeling of flight in her heart. And when she was a child growing up, her mother suffered as she did. Her mother had a diagnosis of schizophrenia. And so her childhood lacked safety. And then when she became a young adult, her nervous system was primed to experience danger as normal. So her 20s were pretty chaotic and out of control as she sought unsafe people to kind of launch into the world with. And then when she got into her late 20s, early 30s, she thought, I just don't want to live like this anymore. This is so chaotic. And she pursued her healing path and did therapy and lots of alternative modalities also. And that brought her a lot of stability and success and progress and growth and happiness. And so when she came to Equine Guidance, she was like, I just don't want to live with this feeling of flight anymore. And I don't know how to shift from it. And in the 3-hour experience, so Equine Guidance, the experience is 3 hours because we go into horse time. And for many years, I offered 90-minute sessions. And then I stopped doing that because the session would end up being 2 hours or 2.5 hours. And then also it ended up being like a feel-good experience when it was at a shorter time frame.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas when it's 3 hours, there's really the opportunity and the time to be able to have nervous system organization happen at a much deeper level. So we're out there together and we're working with the horses, and then Salsa started to kind of back up towards her, and people naturally and instinctually are like, oh, whoa, like the back of the horse, I don't want to get kicked. Let me move over here. And he's this 1,200-pound animal, and he really slowly, gently, and thoughtfully continues to try to back himself up towards her. And she keeps moving and he keeps moving with her. And I said, if you're okay with this, let's see what happens if we stand here and let's see what Salsa wants to do. Because after working with my horses for 20 years, I really trust them. And they really trust me to keep them safe, as I'm never moving any faster than what their nervous system wants to do also or can tolerate. And so Salsa ended up backing himself up into this woman, and the front of her is touching the back of him. So, you can imagine her tail was sort of in the middle of her body. And then he really gently started to rock her back and forth. And, we're just kind of going with this and like, oh, isn't this interesting? And let's see what happens here. And there was a certain point where I actually said to Salsa out loud, I said, don't sit on her. Because, they were like really starting to rock now.
Really rocking.
And then all of a sudden he just walked away. And she said, that flight feeling in my heart is gone. And so the last half an hour to hour was about supporting her in being able to be in that new space, to develop the capacity to be able to tolerate life without this feeling of flight or fear.
And it's sometimes hard to think about the idea of not wanting to fly, needing to be tolerated. But when it's so foreign, and someone isn't used to that, how beautiful that Salsa knew that and knew how to work with, I don't know, what's the language that you use? It's like is it the energetic field, or like, how do you talk about that?
Yeah, so it's the electromagnetic field around us. And then also it's the nervous system, which is also 360 degrees around us. It's, a full circle around us.
Mm-hmm.
And I think also what makes the equine guidance work so powerful is, like I said earlier, if trauma happens in relationship, then the remedy for healing trauma is relationship.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't heal fight, flight, and freeze with fight, flight, and freeze. And the horses are so grounded in their ventral vagal, safe, calm, and connected place. And they're 1,200 pounds of that coherence, that it's like as if the person's system and trains with that, and so safely and gently and lovingly brings it into this healed space because there's no sympathetic charge that's happening.
I wondered if we could close with you sharing, what you've learned in your process with complex trauma that has helped you that maybe you would like others to know about.
The thing that I've learned the most about complex trauma that I'd like to share is that the real remedy, whether we're working with horses or nature or a therapist or whoever, the real remedy is compassion. And horses embody that with such an incredible grace, though the real remedy is compassion, because in that place there's restoration that can happen to the nervous system. And one of my favorite quotes, it's by Thomas Merton. He's a Catholic mystic, and before people were researching compassion, I Googled it one day, I think that's the answer. I think that's the answer of what horses are doing. This is maybe 10 or 15 years ago. And the only thing that popped up on the internet at the time was Thomas Merton's quote. And he said, compassion is the keen awareness of the interdependence of all things. So what I'd like to leave everyone with today is there's tremendous value in being compassionate to yourself. And another way to think of that is to talk to yourself like you would talk to your best friend in a compassionate and loving and kind way.
That's so profound. And that's, again, to point to the work that the horses are doing with you, your co-therapists, your co-facilitators, is I felt that compassion. I really did. Yeah, there was a really poignant moment for me where I felt drawn to have my hand on Mimi's heart, and I could feel the heartbeat and this kind of energetic compassion. I mean, that's how I would describe it, is it just kind of filled me up. That's what it felt like, being with. And you had mentioned it's the process or the practice of being with and not doing to, or however you said that. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but
No, that's it.
I thought of that in that moment. Yeah, being with Mimi, it was like she was teaching me something. And I would say, now looking back on it, I think it was that compassion piece that you're pointing to.
Yeah. I think that compassion is the last frontier of humanity, because with compassion, there's connection and safety and calm. And it really is the remedy for the disease of disconnection.
I would agree with that. Thank you so much, Belle. This has been such a lovely conversation and time together. And I wondered if you could share with listeners, where can they find you? Where can they find your work and get in touch with you?
Yeah. equineguidance.com, and then also isabelleshook.com. Those are my two websites. And my email address is belle@equineguidance.com or equineguidance@gmail.com. And I'm in Sedona, Arizona.
And yes, I know earlier you mentioned that you have people come from all over the globe, everywhere, all over the United States and everywhere in the world to come and work with you. So that's exciting. And thank you for sharing your information so that folks can get in touch with you and do this work.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for joining us for today's episode. To find more about our guest and their work, check the show notes or visit us at narmtraining.com/transformingtrauma. Are you working with clients or populations dealing with the effects of adverse childhood experiences and complex trauma? If so, we invite you to consider joining us to become trained in the neuroaffective relational model in support of trauma-informed care. We are excited to offer psychoeducational and clinical trainings for a variety of mental health professionals. For more information on these NARM trainings and to apply, please visit www.narmtraining.com/schedule. Thanks to Andrea Klunder and the Creative Imposter Studios for producing and editing, to Tori Essex for our album art, and to Brad Kammer for the creation of this podcast. We look forward to building community, connection with you, and changing the world by transforming trauma.